October 14, 2024, standing at a signing ceremony in Sacramento, Governor Gavin Newsom declared war on what he called big oil. He promised that new refinery regulations would protect families from price gouging and finally bring California's fuel market under control. 48 hours later, one of the state's largest refineries announced it was shutting down. That single decision erased nearly 8% of California's fuel supply and put hundreds of union workers on a countdown to unemployment. While victory speeches continued, a far more serious crisis was already unfolding behind closed doors. How did California move so quickly from reform to disruption? And what forced state leaders to quietly change course months later? The answers begin with a law passed despite repeated warnings. That law was Assembly Bill X-21, drafted as a direct challenge to how oil refineries operated in California. At the signing ceremony, Governor Newsom framed the issue in simple terms. Gas price spikes are profit spikes for big oil, he said, promising relief for consumers and accountability for refiners. The legislation handed sweeping new authority to the California Energy Commission. Refineries were now required to maintain minimum reserves of gasoline and diesel at levels determined by the state, a measure intended to prevent sudden supply drops that could trigger price surges. On paper, the logic sounded reasonable. In reality, it ignored how refineries actually operate, under constantly shifting demand, seasonal fuel blends, and strict physical limits on storage capacity. The new rules went even further. Routine maintenance, including work required for safety or aging equipment, now required 120 days advance notice to the state along with a detailed resupply plan. Regulators could delay, deny, or attach conditions to any request. At the same time, the state gained the power to judge refinery profits. If margins rose above a set threshold, penalties could reach between $100,000 and $1 million per day, with only a 3-day window to fix the issue before fines began piling up. Industry analysts warned that the system would be nearly impossible to navigate. The combination of inventory mandates, profit controls, and regulatory discretion created uncertainty that made long-term planning nearly impossible. Those warnings were dismissed as industry propaganda, and officials insisted the law would save Californians hundreds of millions of dollars. For refinery operators, the message was clear. Business as usual was over, and the cost of staying open in California had fundamentally changed. On October 16, 2024, Phillips 66 announced that its Los Angeles refinery complex would shut down by the end of 2025. The impact was immediate. The facility, which had operated for more than a century, supplied roughly 139,000 barrels per day of fuel, including gasoline, diesel, and jet fuel. In a single announcement, 8% of California's refining capacity was effectively erased. Gone! For workers, the consequences were personal. 600 permanent employees and 300 contractors learned that their jobs would disappear. Many earned between $80,000 and $120,000 a year and had built their lives around the refinery. Severance was capped at 16 weeks. The United Steelworkers Union warned the closure would ripple through surrounding communities, affecting local businesses, schools, and city budgets. Phillips 66 leadership cited market dynamics, the growing regulatory burden, stating bluntly that refining fuel locally no longer made economic sense. Instead, the company began preparing to import fuel using the same infrastructure while exploring redevelopment of the 650-acre site. California's refining era, once the backbone of its fuel independence, was starting to fade. As refining capacity shrank, the margin for error disappeared. Imports would have to come from overseas, often from Asia, taking weeks to arrive and exposing the state to global disruptions. The irony was hard to miss. Fuel now crossed the Pacific on tankers burning heavy bunker fuel while California claimed progress on emissions at home. On June 27, 2025, the California Energy Commission delivered a 24-page letter to the governor. Its findings were blunt. California's refining capacity was already insufficient, and with upcoming closures, imports could account for up to 30% of the state's gasoline supply. In Northern California, as much as half the fuel supply could come from outside the state. The commission warned of volatile prices, supply disruptions, and growing risks during routine maintenance. Notably, the recommendation was not tougher enforcement. It was restraint. Pause the penalties. Work with refiners, not against them. Months later, the political tone shifted further. In September, the same administration that had promised to end oil drilling fast-tracked new permits in Kern County. The reversal was quiet but unmistakable. By mid-2025, Californians were paying some of the highest fuel prices in the nation. While imports rose and supply risks grew, the policies meant to protect consumers had instead made the system more fragile. The lesson is not ideological. It is structural. Ignoring technical warnings does not eliminate reality. It only delays the moment when the cost becomes impossible to ignore. Markets, infrastructure, and supply chains do not respond to intentions. They respond to constraints. And in the end, the market always delivers the final verdict. Could this outcome have been avoided?